We thought it was going to be a fun weekend. Just me and four of my friends, camping out in the middle of nowhere. There was no cell signal, but that was part of the charm. Disconnect, breathe the fresh air, and get away from the noise of the city. I remember the first night clearly. We sat around the campfire, talking about everything and nothing, laughing, drinking a few beers, and watching the stars. I don't know why I'm focusing on that memory so much now. Maybe because I didn't realize it would be the last time things felt normal. The morning after that first night, I woke up to silence. The fire was out, and I could smell the damp ashes mixing with the cold morning air. It felt too quiet, like the world was waiting for something to happen. I noticed the tent that Mark and Jess had been sleeping in was gone. At first, I thought maybe they woke up early, packed it up, and moved somewhere else as a joke. "Mark? Jess?" I called out, waiting for a laugh, a response, but nothing. We searched the campsite. All their stuff, bags, jackets, shoes, was still here, just no tent. And no Mark or Jess. We started getting worried. Maybe they went for a walk and got lost. But then, why would they take the tent? After an hour of looking, that nervous feeling in my stomach grew into something darker. I kept checking my phone, knowing full well there was no signal. We split up to search, staying within shouting distance of each other. I kept calling their names but only heard my voice echo back. I could see it on everyone's faces. We were scared, though none of us wanted to say it out loud. As we wandered deeper into the woods, something odd started creeping into my mind. I couldn't shake this strange sense that I'd heard a story like this before. People disappearing from campsites, leaving no trace behind. It was a stupid thought, but I couldn't remember who told me or when. And the more I tried to remember, the less clear everything became. It's like a fog settled over my thoughts, making it hard to focus. We found something about an hour into our search. Deep in the woods, away from the trails, we stumbled across old, abandoned camping gear. A tent that was mostly collapsed, with holes in it like it had been left there for years. And scattered around were things like backpacks, shoes, and rusted-out lanterns. At first, we thought it might be from another group, maybe hikers who got lost a long time ago. But then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A tattered jacket, dirty and torn, but it looked just like the one Jess was wearing last night. It wasn't hers, couldn't be. It was too old, too dirty. But still, the feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. The others were just as shaken. We hurried back to the campsite, no closer to finding Mark or Jess. By the time we got back, the mood had changed completely. Everyone was on edge, throwing out theories, accusing each other of messing around. Maybe they just left, someone said, though no one really believed that. The silence between us got heavier. One of the guys, Rob, started suggesting that someone else in the group might be behind it, as if it was some sick joke that went too far. It made no sense, but the paranoia spread fast. One by one, we started doubting each other. It didn't help that, by then, none of us had eaten since breakfast, and nerves were frayed. As night fell again, the tension hit its peak. We decided to sleep in shifts just in case Mark and Jess came back, or in case something worse happened. I could hardly sleep, jumping at every noise outside the tent. The forest seemed to have changed, every snap of a twig feeling like a threat. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I noticed something immediately. Two more of us were missing. Rob and Sarah, who were supposed to be on watch, were gone. I felt a wave of terror crash over me. No sound, no struggle, just vanished, like Mark and Jess. I shook the others awake, trying to keep my voice steady, but by then, we were all just barely holding it together. Panic was in our eyes. It was clear now that whatever was happening wasn't normal. The three of us who were left debated whether to stay or leave, but I don't think it mattered anymore. We didn't know where we were, and walking around in the dark would just get us lost. So we waited, but none of us spoke. What was there left to say? As the hours passed, one of my friends, Kevin, tried to suggest that maybe we'd all just been imagining things, that maybe Mark, Jess, Rob, and Sarah had just wandered off and we'd find them in the morning. But his voice was shaking. He didn't believe it. Then I blinked, and suddenly Kevin was gone too. I didn't even hear him leave. It was just me and Rachel now. We didn't know what to do. How could someone just vanish like that without a sound? Rachel started crying quietly. I was too scared to even think clearly. And then, in the distance, I saw something move. A shadow, or maybe a figure. It was hard to tell, but it was there. My heart started pounding in my chest. I whispered to Rachel that we needed to leave, but before I could do anything, she disappeared too, just gone, like the rest of them. I'm writing this now, but I don't know how long I have. I can't leave, and I'm too afraid to move. I don't know what took my friends, or if it's coming for me next, but something's out there in these woods. Something real. If you're reading this, don't come here. Don't go camping. Some people disappear, and no one ever finds out why. We went camping last weekend. 3 of us, me, Jonas, and Alex. The plan was simple. Spend 2 nights in the woods, far from everything. Jonas knew the place. Said it was quiet, isolated, perfect to escape from the usual noise of life. I liked the idea. Alex was excited too. The first day was normal. We arrived early, set up the tents, and gathered some wood for a fire. It was so peaceful, almost too peaceful. No people, no animals, not even birds. It was just still. I joked that we had found the quietest corner of the earth, but in the back of my mind, the silence felt strange. Alex laughed. I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's because I need to get it out of my head, but I still can't believe what happened. It's like it wasn't real, but at the same time, it's all I think about. So, here it goes. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. Just me and a few friends out camping. We had found this spot deep in the woods, about a 2-hour drive from the city. No one else around, no cell service, just pure peace. At least that's what we thought. The first day was great. We set up our tents, collected firewood, and by the time the sun went down, we had a good fire going. We were laughing, telling stories, feeling like we were the only people left in the world. But around midnight, things got weird. A man came out of the woods. He just walked right up to us, and I swear, I didn't hear him coming. He looked rough, dirty clothes, unshaved face, eyes wide like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't ask for anything, didn't even say hello. Instead, he just said, "You need to leave, now." We all kind of froze. One of my friends, Nick, tried to ask him what he meant, but the guy just shook his head. "It's not safe here. Trust me. Go now, while you still can." His voice was shaky, like he was scared of something, but we didn't take him seriously. How could we? He was just some random guy, probably living in the woods for too long. We shrugged it off, said thanks but no thanks, and he walked back into the trees. That's when things started to feel off. The woods felt different, like they were too quiet. You know that feeling when something just isn't right? But we didn't talk about it. We just sat there, pretending everything was normal. Later that night, the noises started. It wasn't loud or anything, just the sound of twigs snapping, like someone was moving through the trees around us. I thought it was an animal at first, but it felt too deliberate. Like whoever, or whatever it was, wanted us to know they were there. It was messing with us. At one point, I saw something move, just on the edge of the firelight. I'm not crazy, I know I saw it, but when I told the others, they just laughed it off. "It's just the dark playing tricks on you," Nick said. But I knew better. Something was out there. We all went to bed eventually, though I didn't sleep much. The sounds didn't stop. If anything, they got closer. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. In the morning, I woke up to find the camp in chaos. Nick was missing. His tent was empty, sleeping bag still there like he had just disappeared in the middle of the night. We called for him, searched the area, but there was no sign of him. That's when we found it. The blood. It wasn't much, just a few drops on the leaves, but enough to make my stomach drop. We panicked. We tried to leave, but when we got to the car, it wouldn't start. Dead. And no one had signal to call for help. We were stuck. Then, out of nowhere, the woodsman showed up again. He didn't say anything this time, just stood there, watching us from the edge of the clearing. His eyes locked on mine, and I swear, he looked almost sad. Desperate, we ran up to him, yelling, asking if he knew what happened to Nick. He didn't answer. "Why didn't you listen?" he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too late now." We tried to ask more questions, but he just turned and walked back into the trees, like before. That's when the fear really set in. Whatever was out there wasn't just messing with us. It had taken Nick, and we could be next. I don't know how long we waited, too scared to move, too scared to stay. We thought about walking out of the woods, but every direction felt wrong, like the forest was closing in on us. Hours passed, and by late afternoon, we decided we had no choice but to try. We packed up what we could carry and started walking. The whole time, it felt like we weren't alone, like something was following us, watching from the shadows. Every few minutes, one of us would hear something, branches snapping, footsteps, but we never saw anything. I don't remember much about that walk, just that it felt like it went on forever. And then, suddenly, the trees broke, and we were on the road. Just like that, we were out. We flagged down a car, got help, and went straight to the police. They searched the woods for days, but didn't find Nick. They didn't find anything, no sign of struggle, no tracks, no blood, nothing. They said he probably got lost, but I know that's not what happened. I still don't know what happened to him. Maybe I never will, but I'll never forget the look in that woodsman's eye. He knew something he wasn't telling us. I don't go camping anymore. If you ever find yourself in the woods and someone tells you to leave, just listen, don't stay, because sometimes there's no second chance. We had done this hike many times before. It was one of those places we all felt comfortable with. The trail was familiar, marked by worn-out signs and stones, and the forest was peaceful. That day, it was me, Ben, Sarah, and Kevin. A few hours hike, that's all it was supposed to be. We didn't pack much, just some water, snacks, and our phones. I didn't expect anything to go wrong, especially not in a place we knew so well. The first part of the hike was normal. We walked, joked, and shared stories. But after about an hour, something changed. The trail didn't look the same. At first, I didn't say anything because I thought I was just overthinking it. Maybe I was distracted, or maybe we had taken a different turn without noticing. But then Ben stopped and looked around. "Do you guys remember this spot?" he asked. We all stared at the trees, at the dirt path beneath our feet. I didn't recognize it, but I wasn't sure. Sarah shrugged, and Kevin laughed, brushing it off. "It's fine. We've probably just walked a little farther than usual," Kevin said, leading the way again. No one argued, but deep down, I felt a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. We kept walking, though, pretending everything was okay. About 30 minutes later, we passed a tree with strange markings carved into the bark. Ben stopped again. "We're lost," he said quietly. "No, we're not," Kevin replied, a bit too quickly. "We just need to go back the way we came." We turned around, heading back in the direction we thought was right. But the trees started to look different, and soon the path was gone. No markers, no trail. I checked my phone. No signal. Everyone else did too. Same thing. We were out there with no GPS, no maps, and nothing but trees and shadows around us. The sun was starting to set, and that's when the mood changed completely. "We should have been out of here by now," Sarah muttered. Her voice was shaking a little. None of us admitted it, but we were all scared. We kept walking, this time in silence. Every crunch of leaves under our feet felt louder. Every rustle in the trees made me turn my head, expecting to see something or someone there. But it was always nothing. Still, the feeling that we weren't alone grew stronger. "I swear we've passed that tree before," Ben said, pointing to the one with the markings again. "We're going in circles." Kevin started to argue, but Sarah cut him off. "I saw someone," she whispered. We all stopped. Her face was pale, eyes wide. "I saw someone watching us from behind that tree." We didn't know what to say. Kevin looked at her like she was losing it, but Ben didn't laugh. He just stared at the tree she was pointing at. There was no one there, but that didn't mean she was wrong. "We should move," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Just keep moving." That's when things got worse. Every path we tried seemed to pull us deeper into the woods. The more we walked, the more the forest closed in around us. The trees felt like they were watching, bending closer as we passed. I swear I could feel eyes on my back every time we turned. And no matter how fast we moved, it felt like we weren't getting anywhere. As night fell, the air became colder. The shadows stretched longer, making it hard to see. Ben lit a flashlight, but the dim light only made the darkness around us feel heavier. We were panicking now, none of us admitting it out loud, but feeling it with every step. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice shaky again. "It feels like something's leading us away. We should have found the road by now." I didn't want to say it, but she was right. It wasn't just that we were lost. It felt like the forest was guiding us in circles, deeper into the trees. After what felt like hours, we heard footsteps behind us. Not ours, someone else's. They were slow, deliberate, like whoever it was didn't care if we heard them. We stopped. The footsteps stopped. No one spoke. "Who's there?" Kevin called out. No answer, just silence, stretching long and heavy. We kept walking, but the footsteps returned, this time closer. My heart was pounding in my chest. I thought about running, but where would we run to? There was no direction that felt safe anymore. Suddenly, Ben turned and shouted, "Stop following us!" His voice echoed in the stillness, but nothing moved. No one answered. Just trees and darkness. "We have to stay calm," I tried to say, but my own voice betrayed me. My hands were shaking. Then Sarah screamed. She pointed at something in the shadows, but none of us saw it. Whatever she saw, it was enough to break her. She started running, and without thinking, we all followed. We didn't know where we were going, just that we had to get away. But the more we ran, the worse it got. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was driving us further in. The trees closed in tighter, the ground sloped downward, and soon we were stumbling over rocks and roots. We stopped again, gasping for breath, but this time the footsteps behind us were louder, closer. I turned to look, but all I saw was darkness. Then Ben said something that sent a chill through me. "We're not getting out of here," he whispered. "Someone's doing this to us." I didn't want to believe him, but I felt it too. The forest, the footsteps, the way we kept getting pulled deeper, it wasn't random. Someone was out there, making sure we didn't leave. In the end, it wasn't exhaustion or fear that stopped us. It was the sound of another pair of footsteps right behind us. This time, they didn't stop when we did, and then the flashlight went out. I'm not proud of this story, but I need to write it down. Maybe sharing will make me feel better, or at least help me understand what happened that night. I don't know if anyone will believe me. Honestly, I'm not even sure I believe myself. But this is what happened. Last summer, my friends and I decided to go camping deep in the woods, away from everything. It was supposed to be a weekend to relax. No phones, no work, just us and nature. There were four of us: me, my friend Kevin, his girlfriend Sarah, and our buddy Tom. We found this campsite far from the usual hiking trails, isolated and peaceful. It felt perfect. We got there early in the afternoon, set up our tents, and started a small fire as the sun began to dip. We laughed, talked about dumb stuff, and cooked dinner over the flames. The woods were quiet, except for the occasional rustling of leaves. It felt safe, like nothing could go wrong out here. But that feeling changed when it got dark. It was probably around 9 or 10 p.m. when we saw the first sign of trouble. We were sitting around the fire, and I noticed movement in the shadows. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then Kevin pointed out the silhouettes, people walking toward us. They moved slowly, almost like they didn't want us to notice them. When they got closer, we saw there were three of them, two men and a woman, all in their late 20s or early 30s. The leader, a tall guy with a shaved head, smiled at us, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like, I don't know, like he knew something we didn't. The woman was quiet, just standing there staring at us. The other guy, a bit shorter, had this weird grin on his face. The tall guy said, "You're in our spot." We all looked at each other, confused. Kevin tried to be polite, explaining that we hadn't seen anyone else around and thought this was just an open campsite. But the guy cut him off, saying, "It's ours. We always come here. You need to leave." Sarah looked nervous, and I could feel my heart beating faster. There was something about the way they stood there, so calm and sure of themselves. I don't know why, but I started to feel like we were in danger. Kevin tried to reason with them, offering to share the space, but the tall guy wasn't interested. "We don't want to share," he said. His tone was flat, cold. "We want you gone." That's when things started to get weird. The short guy walked up to our campfire, grabbed a piece of wood we were using to cook, and threw it into the bushes. It wasn't just annoying, it was a clear message. He wanted a reaction. Kevin stood up, telling him to back off, but the short guy just laughed. I looked around, realizing how far we were from anyone. No cell service, no one to call for help. We were really on our own. My hands started shaking, but I didn't know what to do. Sarah whispered to me, asking if we should pack up and leave. But it felt too late for that. These people weren't going to just let us go. Then the tall guy took a step closer. He picked up one of our knives from the table and held it, not threateningly, but casually, like it was his now. "I said leave," he repeated. Tom, who'd been quiet this whole time, finally snapped. He lunged at the guy, trying to grab the knife. It all happened so fast. 1 second they were struggling, and the next, the woman hit Tom from behind with something. He fell hard, groaning in pain. That's when everything went to hell. Kevin shouted and ran at the tall guy, but the short man tackled him. It was chaos. I froze for a second, not knowing what to do, but then I saw Sarah, her face white with fear, and I knew we had to run. I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the trees. We could still hear the sounds of fighting behind us, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. We ran blindly into the forest, branches scratching our arms and faces. I had no idea where we were going, just that we needed to get as far away from those people as possible. My mind was racing. Were Kevin and Tom okay? Should we go back for them? Every noise in the woods made me jump. I felt like we were being hunted. We must have run for 15 minutes before we stopped to catch our breath. I was shaking all over, and Sarah was crying quietly. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't even think straight. I was too scared. Then, in the distance, I heard footsteps. They weren't running, just slow, deliberate steps. I crouched down, pulling Sarah with me, trying to stay hidden behind some bushes. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could barely breathe. The footsteps got closer. I could see a shadow moving through the trees. It was one of them. I couldn't tell which one. They were just walking, scanning the forest like they were looking for something or someone. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see us. But then the figure stopped, only a few feet away from where we were hiding. They stood there for what felt like forever, and then they turned, looking right in our direction. I swear they saw us. I don't know how we got out of there. I don't remember much after that, just running and not stopping until we found the road. We never saw Kevin or Tom again. The police didn't find anything either, just our abandoned campsite. I still don't know what those people wanted, why they were there, or why they chose us. But sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if they're still out there, waiting. I never used to go camping. It wasn't my thing. But after a stressful year at work, I just wanted some peace. Alone time. No phone, no emails, no people. So I packed my stuff, drove a few hours out of the city, and found a campsite deep in the woods. It was quiet, really quiet. No cars, no noises, just the wind through the trees. The first day was perfect. I hiked around, set up my tent, and started a small fire. The kind of calm you don't get living in a city. I thought I'd finally found some peace. By the time the sun set, I felt lighter. That night, sitting by the fire, I noticed something strange, a small light far off in the woods. It was faint, barely visible through the trees, but I saw it. I figured it was another camper. I wasn't alone in these woods after all. It didn't bother me. The next night, though, that light was closer. I was lying in my tent trying to sleep when I saw it again. This time, it wasn't so far away. It moved slowly, like someone walking with a flashlight. I stared at it for a long time, wondering why someone would be wandering around this late. The light eventually disappeared, and I fell asleep, telling myself it was nothing. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it. The light came back again, but now it was just a few hundred meters from my campsite. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched it from my tent. It wasn't normal. Someone was out there, but why? I asked some of the other campers nearby the next morning. They looked at me like I was crazy. No one had seen a light. "Maybe you're just tired," one of them said. I tried to laugh it off, but I felt uneasy. That night, I stayed up waiting for the light to appear. I didn't want to sleep. I didn't want to feel that dread again, the kind that crept up on me when I saw it. I sat by the fire, listening. Around midnight, the light came back, closer than ever. I could hear the leaves crunching underfoot. Someone was walking, slowly, deliberately. My heart raced. It wasn't just a light now. There was something else, something I couldn't see. I told myself it was an animal, even though I knew it wasn't. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check it out. I didn't get far. The second I moved closer, the light disappeared. Just gone. When I got back to my tent, something was wrong. I didn't notice at first, but then I realized my stuff was different. My water bottle had been moved, and my backpack was open. I hadn't left it like that. My hands were shaking, and I could feel a cold sweat on the back of my neck. Someone had been here while I was gone. The next day, I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to admit I was scared. It felt stupid. Maybe I was just tired, like they said. I convinced myself it was nothing and stayed. That was a mistake. The final night, everything changed. I sat in my tent, trying not to think about the light, but it came again. This time, it wasn't far off. The flashlight was right outside my tent, shining through the fabric. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. The light didn't move either. It just stayed there, as if whoever was holding it was staring right at me. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, soft, circling my tent. I didn't dare make a sound. The footsteps stopped and the light turned off. For a second, there was nothing but silence. I thought maybe they were gone, that I was safe. But then I heard the zip of the tent start to move. Someone was unzipping my tent. I grabbed my knife. My hand was shaking so hard I wasn't sure I could use it if I needed to. The zip moved again, slowly, like whoever was out there wanted to scare me. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I raised the knife, ready to strike, but the zip stopped. I waited, but nothing happened. I don't know how long I sat there, knife in hand, waiting. But eventually, I worked up the courage to check. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. There was no one, just the flashlight, lying on the ground, still on. It lit up the area around my campsite, but there wasn't a single person in sight. I didn't sleep that night. I packed up as soon as the sun rose, throwing everything into my car as fast as I could. As I was leaving, I noticed something. Boot prints, large ones, circled my tent. They led off into the woods, disappearing into the thick trees. I didn't stop to think about it. I just drove. I didn't care where, as long as it was far from those woods. Even now, I don't know who was out there. I don't know why they left that flashlight or why they didn't come back. But I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see that light again, getting closer and closer. I'm not really sure why I decided to camp alone that weekend. Maybe it was to clear my head or just get away from everything for a bit. Life had been heavy and I needed some space. The forest seemed perfect for that. Quiet, remote, untouched. A place where no one would bother me. I drove up a narrow road into the woods, setting up camp next to a small stream. The sound of the water was calming, though I felt a strange tension, a kind of heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite shake. But I brushed it off. I was probably just stressed from work and needed to relax. I spent the first few hours walking around, taking in the fresh air, and gathering wood for the fire. That's when I noticed it. A patch of ground that looked off. It wasn't obvious at first, but the more I stared, the more I realized the dirt there had been disturbed. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to it, like something was pulling me to take a closer look. My hands were shaking as I knelt down and started digging, pushing away the loose earth. I didn't go too deep before I hit something. A dark, soft piece of cloth, stained and sticking out from the soil. I froze. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. This wasn't an animal's burial. It looked like... No, I didn't want to think about it. I quickly pushed the dirt back into the hole, covering it as fast as I could. Whatever it was, I didn't want to know. I told myself to forget about it, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. After all, I was in the middle of nowhere. Who would I even tell? And besides, leaving now would feel like running away from my own mind, my own imagination. I decided to stay, convincing myself I was overreacting. That night, I lay in my tent, trying to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grave. I kept thinking about what might be in it, why it was there, and if anyone else knew about it. My mind wouldn't let me rest, and the forest, once so quiet, suddenly felt too still. It was that kind of silence that gets under your skin, the kind where every little sound becomes too loud. It must have been around midnight when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching the leaves around my tent. My heart pounded in my chest as I held my breath, listening. Someone was out there, walking in circles around my campsite. My whole body tensed up. I didn't move. I couldn't. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then started again, closer this time. It felt like whoever or whatever it was just outside the thin fabric of my tent. I was too scared to look, but I forced myself to peek through a small crack in the zipper. The night was dark, but I didn't see anyone. No shadow, no figure, just the black trees swaying in the wind. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe an animal, but the footsteps were too deliberate, too human. I stayed awake the rest of the night, heart racing, waiting for something to happen. But eventually, the sound stopped and the forest was silent again. When the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I hurried out of the tent, heading straight for the spot where I had found the disturbed ground the day before. I don't know why I went back. Maybe to prove to myself it had all been in my head. But when I got there, the grave was gone, completely gone. The ground was smooth, untouched, like no one had ever dug there at all. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? I couldn't understand how it had disappeared so quickly, and I started to doubt everything. Maybe I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. Maybe I was just tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That day, I felt like I was being watched. No matter where I went, that eerie feeling of eyes on me wouldn't go away. The forest, which had felt peaceful before, now seemed sinister, like it was hiding something from me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was never anyone there. When night fell again, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat by the fire staring into the flames, trying to keep my mind busy. But the noises started again. This time, the footsteps were louder, heavier, moving faster. They circled my tent, the sound of them getting closer and closer, until I could hear breathing, shallow and ragged, just outside the fabric. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my flashlight. But when I shone it outside, there was nothing, no one. I didn't wait for the morning. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could and started to leave. But just as I was about to get on the trail, I saw something in the distance. A figure, standing near the spot where I'd found the grave, digging. They were hunched over, their back to me, but I knew they were digging in the exact same place. I froze, unable to move. I watched for what felt like hours, but I couldn't make out who or what it was. My heart was pounding in my ears as I slowly backed away, hoping they hadn't seen me. Just as I turned to run, I glanced back one last time. The figure had stopped digging and was standing perfectly still, facing my direction. I didn't stop running until I was out of the forest. Even now, I don't know what I saw, or if I really saw anything at all. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear footsteps outside my window, and I can't help but wonder if they ever stopped following me. I always loved the quiet of the woods. That's why I decided to go camping alone last weekend. I didn't want the company of anyone, just me, the trees, and the sounds of nature. I know, people say it's not safe to camp alone, but I've been doing this for years. I'm careful. I keep to familiar trails, I pack enough supplies, and I always make sure I'm close enough to civilization if anything goes wrong. But this time, something felt different from the start. It was quiet, too quiet, even for the forest. I set up camp by the river, about an hour's hike from the main road. The air was cool, and the trees cast long shadows as the sun began to set. After getting my tent up and starting a small fire, I sat back to We were on the road for hours, driving toward a weekend camping trip that we'd planned for months. It was me, my two best friends, and their girlfriends. The car was packed with snacks, tents, and sleeping bags. The drive felt endless. the winding roads through thick forests both calming and eerie. I drove while the others chatted, the GPS guiding us deeper into the woods. No one was worried. Why would we be? The sun started to dip, casting long shadows across the road. It was getting darker, and the trees seemed to close in around us. The air felt heavier, but I didn't say anything. Maybe it was just the isolation, knowing there wasn't another car in sight. Then, we saw it. A roadblock up ahead. A truck was parked across the road, blocking our way, and 3 men stood by it. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. The men didn't wear uniforms, and there were no signs warning of road work. Something was off. As we got closer, one of the men waved us to stop. He came up to my window, leaned in, and said the road ahead was closed due to a landslide. But the way he said it didn't sound right. He wasn't friendly, didn't explain much, just repeated that we had to turn around. His eyes, cold and flat, made my skin crawl. One of my friends in the back seat asked if we could take another route. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, motioning us to leave. I hesitated, but the silence in the car told me everyone felt it too. Something wasn't right. I put the car in reverse, slowly turning around. As we drove back the way we came, I checked the mirror. The men were still there, watching us, their faces barely visible in the fading light. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared behind us. A truck. Their truck. At first, I thought maybe they were just heading home, but they stayed too close, their lights blinding. I tried to speed up, but so did they. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't a coincidence. They were following us. Panic set in. My friends started yelling, telling me to drive faster. I floored it, but the truck kept up, swerving side to side, trying to push us off the road. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to stay on the narrow, winding road. My mind was racing. Why were they doing this? What did they want? We lost cell service about an hour ago, and now, even if we called for help, no one could reach us. We were alone. Suddenly, the road split. I took a sharp turn down a narrow dirt path, hoping to lose them. For a moment, it worked. The headlights disappeared, and the only sounds were the engine and our breathing. But then I realized something worse. This wasn't the right way. The GPS had no signal, and we were driving deeper into the forest, away from any main roads. We hit a dead end. Trees surrounded us, and the forest was thick. There was no going back. I slammed on the brakes, and we all jumped out of the car. "Run!" someone shouted, though I'm not sure who. We split up without thinking, each of us disappearing into the woods, the darkness swallowing us. My breath came in quick, sharp gasps as I ran. I couldn't hear anyone else, just my own footsteps and the snapping of branches beneath me. Every noise felt too loud. I stumbled over roots, my legs burning, but I couldn't stop. Somewhere behind me, I could hear voices. They were close. Too close. I crouched behind a tree, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. I held my breath. Then I saw him, one of the men from the roadblock. He was holding a flashlight, sweeping it back and forth, looking for me. I felt a surge of panic, but something else too. Anger. I grabbed a broken branch at my feet, waited until he was close enough, and then swung it as hard as I could. It hit him in the side of the head, and he went down. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold or not. I just ran. Eventually, I found one of my friends, shaken but alive. The others were still missing. We had no choice but to keep moving. We didn't know how many of them there were or if the others had been caught, but we couldn't stay in one place. The forest felt like a maze, and we had no way out. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Finally, we stumbled onto a back road, exhausted, our clothes torn and faces scratched. We flagged down a car, desperate for help. The driver, an older man, stopped and rolled down his window. For the first time all night, I felt a sense of relief. But that relief died the moment I looked into his eyes. They were the same cold, flat eyes as the man at the roadblock. Before I could react, the driver smiled. "Looks like you've had a rough night," he said, his voice too calm. The realization hit me hard, like ice in my veins. We weren't saved. We were trapped, and there was no way out. That's when I knew no one was coming to help us. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My friends had planned this camping trip for months, but I almost canceled at the last minute. Something felt off about going to the woods this time. Maybe it was the news lately, people going missing, weird sightings in remote places. But in the end, I caved. Peer pressure and all that. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The place was remote, just the way we liked it. No phone signal, no other campers, just us and the trees. After we set up the tents, we built a fire. You know, the usual stuff, roasting marshmallows, talking, laughing. At first, everything was normal, the kind of trip we'd had many times before. As the night came down, someone brought up scary stories. We had done this on every camping trip, and it never bothered me before. But this time, something about it felt different. The woods seemed too quiet. You could only hear the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves, which could have just been the wind or maybe some small animal. I tried to shake it off, but it was like a weight was pressing on my chest. We started telling stories. Matt went first, his usual one about a stalker lurking around campsites like ours. It was stupid, but it got everyone on edge. Then Lisa told one about a group of campers who went missing, only for their bodies to be found weeks later, deep in the woods, with no clear explanation of what happened to them. I laughed along with the others, but my mind was somewhere else. The firelight flickered on the trees, casting long shadows that danced with the flames. It was like something was out there, just beyond the glow, watching. And then I heard it. A twig snapped. I turned my head fast, staring into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. When I mentioned it, the others laughed. Probably an animal, they said. I laughed too, but it felt forced. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Maybe the stories were messing with my head. The next morning, I woke up early. Everyone else was still asleep, so I decided to walk around the campsite. I needed to clear my head. As I circled back toward the tents, something caught my eye, a crumpled newspaper half buried under some leaves. I picked it up, curious. The front page sent a shiver down my spine. Local man, missing in forest, last seen near campground. The details sounded eerily familiar to the story Lisa had told the night before. Too familiar. I showed it to the others when they woke up, and while Matt shrugged it off as a weird coincidence, Lisa looked scared. Throughout the day, strange things kept happening. Ben swore he saw someone in the trees just standing there, watching us. When we checked, no one was there. Lisa found an old, dirty backpack hidden in the bushes, and she freaked out, saying it looked exactly like the one from her story. We started arguing, some of us wanting to pack up and leave, others insisting we were just spooking ourselves for no reason. I wanted to leave, but Matt convinced me to stay. He thought we were being paranoid. He even offered to go collect some more firewood alone to prove everything was fine. I should have gone with him. We all should have. An hour passed. Then two. Matt didn't come back. At first, we thought maybe he was just messing with us, trying to scare us. But after a while, we got worried. We split up to look for him, calling his name, our voices echoing through the trees. There was no answer. We only found his flashlight, lying on the ground near the trail, still on. That's when the panic hit. Ben wanted to call the police, but we had no signal. Lisa was crying, saying she knew something bad was going to happen. I tried to stay calm, but inside, I was losing it. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, sure that someone, or something, was following us. As night fell, we gathered back at the camp, but there was no sign of Matt. None of us could sleep. We sat by the fire, staring into the darkness, listening to every tiny sound. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was it all in my head? Were we all just imagining things? Or was someone out there, playing with us? In the early hours of the morning, just before dawn, Lisa screamed. We all jumped up and ran to her tent. She was holding a piece of paper, her hand shaking. It was a note, written in Matt's handwriting, but the letters were uneven, like he'd written it in a hurry, or maybe while terrified. Run. Leave now, before it's too late. We didn't ask questions. We grabbed our stuff and ran, not even bothering to pack properly. I could feel my heart racing as we sprinted through the trees, hearing twigs snapping under our feet. But the worst part was, I needed a break. Work had been hell, and the noise of the city was driving me crazy. So, I decided to go camping, far away from everything, alone. Just me and the forest, for a few days. It sounded peaceful, a way to reset. I've camped before, but this time, something felt different right from the start. I chose a spot deep in the woods, far from the main trail. Quiet. No signs of people anywhere, which was exactly what I wanted. After setting up the tent, I just sat and listened. At first it was calming, the sounds of birds, wind through the trees, nothing else. But there was this feeling I couldn't shake, like someone was watching me. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just nerves. I was alone. There was no one out here. That first night was fine. I didn't sleep great, but that was normal when camping alone. But by the next day, things started getting strange. While setting up my little stove to make some coffee, I saw something shiny on a tree near my tent. It caught my eye. When I walked closer, I saw it was a small camera hidden behind some branches. I froze. It wasn't just a camera, it was pointed right at my campsite. My heart started racing. Who put this here? How long had it been there? I stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to throw it away, get rid of it, but something stopped me. I needed to know more. I pulled it off the tree and examined it. There was a tiny red light blinking on the side. It was recording. I felt sick. Someone had been watching me since I arrived, maybe even before. I looked around, scanning the trees, expecting to see someone hiding, but there was no one. Just me. Or so it seemed. The next few hours were a blur. I packed up some things, got ready to leave. But then, my curiosity took over again. I wanted to know if there were more cameras. So, I started searching, going around the camp, checking the trees, the bushes. That's when I found another one. This one was smaller, almost impossible to see. It was hidden so well that I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been looking closely. That's when the panic really hit. I wasn't imagining things. Someone was actually watching me. And it wasn't some random accident. They had planned this. I sat down and tried to think. Who could be doing this? Why? Maybe it was some weird hunter or a creepy guy who liked to mess with people. But none of that made sense. The cameras were too well placed, too hidden. It wasn't random. I should have left then. I know that now. But at the time, I convinced myself I'd be fine. It was daytime, after all. The woods were quiet, and there was no sign of anyone around. I told myself I was just overreacting. But as the day went on, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It got worse. I felt eyes on me constantly, like they were burning into my skin. Every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a branch, I jumped, thinking someone was creeping up behind me. As the sun started to set, I felt completely trapped. It was too late to leave now. Driving through the forest at night wasn't safe, and I'd be stuck in the dark before I reached the main road. So, I decided to stay one more night. I told myself nothing would happen. I just needed to sleep, get through the night, and leave at first light. That night, I barely slept. I could hear every sound outside the tent, twigs breaking, leaves crunching. But it wasn't the sounds of animals. These were footsteps, slow, careful, trying not to be noticed. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Then, just when I thought maybe I'd imagined it, I heard the soft zip of my tent. My blood went cold. The zipper moved slowly, like whoever was out there was taking their time. I grabbed my flashlight, hands shaking. I didn't know what I was going to do. Shine it at them? Try to fight? My mind was blank with fear. The zipper kept moving. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my heart pounding in my ears. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Just like that, the sound was gone. I waited, listening, but the silence was worse than the footsteps. After a few minutes that felt like hours, I unzipped the tent and crawled out, shaking. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the area, looking for whoever had been there. But there was no one, no sign of anyone. The woods were still and empty. But there, on the flap of my tent, was a note. I stared at it for a moment, not wanting to touch it. When I finally did, my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly hold it. The note was simple, written in messy handwriting. It said, "I've been watching you. I'll be back." That was it. I packed up my stuff in a frenzy, not caring if I left anything behind. I had to get out of there. I didn't even think about the darkness, just ran to my car and drove, heart pounding the whole time. I don't remember most of the drive back. I just kept looking in the rearview mirror, sure that someone was following me. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. I don't know who it was or why they chose me, but I'll never forget that camera, hidden in the trees, and the quiet promise in that note. I'll be back. I don't know why I agreed to the camping trip. I've never been much of an outdoors person, but my friends convinced me. "It'll be good for you," they said. Maybe they were right. The quiet woods seemed like a nice escape from the stress of work, the noise of the city. At first, it felt peaceful, but now I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. I think someone's watching us. We had set up our camp near a lake. The trees were thick, the kind that made you feel like you were miles away from civilization. The first night was uneventful. We had a fire, cooked some food, and joked about how we'd probably see a bear. Nothing. The shelter. I've never been good with telling stories, but this one still keeps me awake at night. It was supposed to be a weekend hike with a few friends, nothing more. But things never turn out how you plan. The storm came out of nowhere. We were at least a few miles from the main trail when the rain started. It wasn't the light kind of rain. It came down in thick sheets, drenching us in seconds. The wind howled, bending trees, and we realized continuing was impossible. The sky was getting darker, and we were far from any proper shelter. That's when we saw the cabin. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, or maybe wishful thinking, but no, it was real. Tucked between some tall trees, hidden by the thick woods, was this old, run-down building. I don't know why it didn't feel right from the start. Maybe it was the way it stood there, isolated, like it had been waiting for us. We had no choice but to go inside. The door creaked as we pushed it open, and the first thing that hit us was the smell. It was a mix of mold and something else, something rotten. The air felt thick, and the darkness inside seemed to swallow the light from our phones. Still, it was better than staying out in the storm. At least, that's what we thought. The place looked like no one had lived there for years. The walls were damp, the furniture was broken, and the windows were covered in grime. But then, I noticed something odd. A dirty mattress in the corner with a few blankets thrown over it, like someone had been sleeping there. There were cans of food scattered on the floor, not too old, and clothes, strange clothes, like they'd been there for a while but recently moved. I tried not to think too much about it. We just needed to wait out the storm, that's all. But my friend Mark wasn't so calm. He kept looking at the door, like he expected someone to come in any moment. "Who do you think lives here?" he asked, but no one answered. As the hours passed, I noticed more things that didn't sit right. There were strange carvings on the wooden walls, symbols I didn't recognize. A few times, I thought I heard footsteps outside, but when I checked, nothing was there. The wind played tricks on my mind, and the darkness inside didn't help. At one point, the door swung open, though none of us had touched it. I jumped, heart pounding, and Mark swore he saw someone standing in the rain just beyond the tree line. I rushed to the window to look, but there was only darkness and the pouring rain. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. By midnight, we were all on edge. That's when we noticed that Sarah was gone. I don't remember hearing anything, no scream, no sound at all. One moment she was sitting near the fireplace, trying to warm herself up, and the next, she was gone. Panic hit us like a wave. We shouted her name, searched the cabin, but she was nowhere to be found. Only a cold draft from the open door greeted us when we stepped outside. I kept thinking if she had just left, we would have seen or heard something. Mark found footprints around the cabin, deep and wet, leading away into the woods. But they didn't make sense. The footprints were large, too big to be Sarah's. Someone had been there, watching us, maybe waiting for the right moment. We spent the next hour searching for her. It felt useless. We were just walking in circles, the rain blinding us. Finally, we gave up and decided to return to the cabin. That's when we found it, a small, hidden door in the floor under an old rug. It was just big enough for someone to crawl through, leading into a space below the cabin. I didn't want to go down there. My gut told me something terrible was waiting. But we had no choice. The space beneath the cabin was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just a cellar or a storage room. There were boxes filled with clothes, shoes, even old photographs of people. People I didn't recognize. My stomach turned when I realized these were items taken from other hikers, people who had gone missing in these woods. There were journals too, some torn, some with pages missing, but all telling the same story. People trapped by the storm, taking shelter here, just like us. Then it hit me. This cabin wasn't abandoned by chance. It was used. Someone had been living here, watching, waiting for people like us to wander in. This was a trap. I looked at Mark, and I saw it in his eyes too. We needed to get out, fast. The storm was letting up, but my heart raced faster than ever. We hurried out of that hidden room, grabbed what little we had, and rushed outside. Just as we stepped out into the clearing, I saw movement near the trees. A figure, tall, too tall, stood at the edge of the woods, watching us. My blood went cold. For a second, I froze, and then Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me to run. We didn't stop running until we reached the main trail, gasping for breath. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Whoever, or whatever, had been staying in that cabin, they had let us leave, but only because they wanted to. I don't know if Sarah ever made it out, or if she's still out there somewhere, another victim of the trap we narrowly escaped. Now, whenever I hear about missing hikers in the area, I think of that cabin. It's still out there, waiting for the next group of unlucky people to seek shelter from the storm. I'll never go back. I went camping last weekend with a group of friends. We all needed a break from our everyday lives, and the idea of getting away from the city, surrounded by nothing but trees and the open sky, sounded perfect. We chose a spot deep in the woods, far from any towns or other campers. The first night was quiet. The stars were clear, the fire crackled, and we all fell asleep easily. I even felt relaxed, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was around midnight when I woke up. At first, I didn't know why, but then I heard it. A soft knock on the tent. Just once. Tap, tap. I lay there, listening closely, trying to understand what I heard. It could have been a branch, I thought. But then it came again, slightly louder. Tap, tap. My heart started beating faster. I glanced around inside the tent, but nobody else was awake. I waited, hoping I'd just imagined it. But after a few minutes, there it was again. Tap, tap. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Slowly, I unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled toward the tent entrance, careful not to wake the others. My hands were shaking a little as I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. I held my breath, expecting to see something, or someone. But there was nothing, only darkness. I scanned the area with my eyes, but it was impossible to see much beyond the dim glow of the dying fire. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Fresh ones, leading from the edge of the camp toward the trees. They weren't from any of us. They were too large and clear in the dirt. I swallowed hard, feeling a chill run down my spine. I tried waking one of my friends, shaking his shoulder gently. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, but he only mumbled and rolled over. I wasn't sure if I should tell the others or if I was just overreacting. Maybe it was an animal, I told myself. Something about it didn't feel right, though. The next morning, I mentioned it casually, expecting someone to confirm what I heard, but no one seemed concerned. They laughed it off, saying it was probably nothing, maybe just me dreaming. But I knew what I heard, and those footprints didn't appear on their own. That night, I found it hard to sleep. Every small noise outside made me tense up. My ears were on high alert, listening for anything unusual. It must have been around the same time as the night before when I heard it again. Tap, tap. This time, it was louder, more forceful, like whoever, or whatever, was outside wanted me to know they were there. I froze, listening as the knocking continued, steady and insistent. My mind raced. Should I check again? My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the others would hear it, but they were still fast asleep. I stared at the tent fabric, too scared to unzip it. Then, I noticed something worse. The footprints from the night before, they had returned, but they were closer this time, much closer. It was as if whoever was outside had been standing just inches away from the tent. The knocking stopped after a few more taps. My throat was dry, and my body felt frozen in place. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, staring at the roof of the tent, waiting for morning to come. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted. I told the group again about the knocks and the footprints, but they were still unconvinced. One of my friends even teased me, saying I was probably just hearing things. Maybe the wind knocked a branch against the tent, someone suggested, but I wasn't imagining the footprints, and I wasn't imagining the knocking. I didn't say much the rest of the day, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The feeling of being watched was strong, like eyes were always on me. As night fell again, I found myself dreading sleep. I tried to stay awake, but the weight of exhaustion was too much. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of knocking again. This time, it was fast and loud, like whoever was there was angry. I sat up quickly, my chest tightening with fear. Without thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and threw open the tent flap. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside. The footprints were back, clear in the dirt, leading into the woods. They looked deeper now, like someone had been running. I don't know what pushed me, but I decided to follow them. My legs were shaky as I grabbed the flashlight and walked into the trees, the beam of light bouncing with each step. The woods were completely still. No sound of animals, no rustling of leaves, just silence. I followed the trail of prints, feeling more and more uneasy as I went deeper into the forest. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was wrong. It felt like I wasn't alone, but every time I looked around, there was no one there. The footprints led me to a small clearing. They stopped suddenly, right in the middle of it, as if the person just vanished. I stood there, breathing heavily, shining the light around me. There was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything, but I still felt that same feeling, the feeling of being watched. I turned around and hurried back to camp, my mind racing with 100 different thoughts. When I got back, I looked at the ground in front of my tent, hoping the footprints would be gone. But they weren't. In fact, they were closer now, much closer than before, and there was something else. The footprints were no longer leading away from the camp. They were pointing straight to my sleeping bag, and I swear, at that moment, I felt like someone was right behind me, breathing softly. I woke up with dirt in my mouth. My body felt heavy, cold. I couldn't move much. It was dark, and something was pressing down on my chest. My first thought was, I'm dead. Then I coughed, and my lungs filled with air again. The pressure was dirt, earth. I was buried. Panic hit me hard. I started to thrash, but the soil kept me in place. My arms were pinned under a layer of dirt, but my left hand was free. I clawed at the ground, trying to push myself up. The dirt shifted, falling into my face as I gasped. I tried to scream, but only a low groan escaped. I didn't know how long I had been here, or why. My head hurt and my memory was blank. No idea where I was, what had happened to me, or who had done this. I kept digging, pulling myself out little by little. Each movement was torture. My muscles screamed, my skin felt raw, and every breath tasted like dirt. But I had to get out. The thought of staying buried made my heart race. Whoever did this, they could come back. If I didn't get out now, I'd die for real. After what felt like hours, my head finally broke the surface. I blinked against the sudden light, gasping for clean air. I forced my arms to push the rest of my body out of the grave. When I was free, I collapsed, lying face down in the dirt, too tired to move. The forest around me was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no animals, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I had no idea where I was. The trees stretched up like walls around me, thick and endless. I pushed myself to my knees, looking around. There were no paths, no landmarks, just trees. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. I should remember something, but there was nothing. Just the sharp pain in my head and fear. I stood up on shaky legs, trying to decide what to do next. My clothes were torn, my arms and legs covered in cuts and bruises. I felt weak, but I had to keep moving. Staying here wasn't an option. I didn't know if they were still close. Whoever buried me, they might be watching, waiting for me to die, or come back to finish the job. The forest felt like a trap. I stumbled forward, unsure of where I was going. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. My head throbbed as I tried to remember. Small flashes of something, faces I couldn't place, a struggle, fear. But it was all jumbled, like a dream I couldn't quite reach. As I wandered deeper into the woods, the light began to fade. The sun was going down, and with it, my hope of finding a way out. My panic grew stronger, my breath coming faster. I was lost, and there was no one around to help. The thought of being in the dark, alone, terrified me. But then I heard something. Footsteps. I froze. The steps were slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I didn't turn around at first, hoping I was imagining it. But the sound grew closer. Someone was here. My heart pounded as I tried to stay calm. Don't run, I told myself. Don't run. But fear took over, and I bolted. I ran without looking back, branches scratching at my face and arms. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The footsteps were getting louder, faster. Whoever it was, they were chasing me. I tripped on a root, crashing to the ground. My body screamed in pain as I hit the dirt, but I forced myself to get up. I couldn't stop. Not now. I limped forward, but the footsteps were too close. I could hear their breathing now, hear them crashing through the underbrush. I turned around, ready to fight, but then I saw them. My breath caught in my throat. It was a face I knew, someone I trusted, someone I thought would never hurt me. But now, they were here, holding a shovel. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Why would they do this? Why would they bury me alive? But there was no time to think. They took a step toward me, and I backed away, my body trembling with fear. Why? I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. They didn't answer. Their eyes were cold, empty. I knew then that it didn't matter why. I wasn't getting out of here. I was never supposed to. I turned and ran again, not caring that I couldn't see where I was going, not caring that I was lost. I just had to get away, but deep down, I knew it was pointless. There was no way out. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the sound of their footsteps close behind. We didn't plan for it to be weird, just a normal camping trip. I think that's what makes it worse, knowing it started as an ordinary weekend. There were 4 of us, me, Alex, Jenny, and Matt. We found this campsite online, a small place in the woods, away from the city. Perfect, or so it seemed. We'd wanted to go somewhere quiet, away from people, and this campground was surrounded by nothing but forest. Just a few cabins, some tents, and a fire pit. The first night was great. The sky was full of stars, and we had a fire going. We roasted marshmallows, told stories, the usual stuff. There were other campers nearby, but we didn't talk to them much. They kept to themselves, just sitting by their fires, staring at us sometimes. I guess that was the first sign something was wrong, but at the time, we didn't think much of it. People can be strange, right? Things didn't start getting bad until the next morning. We decided to go for a hike. The map showed a couple of trails, so we picked one that looked easy, nothing too far. We walked for about an hour, but somehow, we ended up back at the camp. Did we take the wrong turn? Alex asked, looking confused. We all laughed it off, thinking we'd made a mistake. We tried again, this time paying attention to the signs, marking trees as we went. But after another hour of walking, we were back at the campground again. It didn't make sense. That's when the feeling of unease started. It wasn't funny anymore. We'd been walking in the right direction, but somehow, we were back where we started. The campers were still there, sitting quietly by their fires, watching us. "This isn't possible," Matt muttered. "We walked straight. How are we back here?" We decided to try again, splitting up into 2 groups. Jenny and I took one path, and Alex and Matt took another. We agreed to meet back at the campground in an hour if we didn't find a way out. Jenny and I walked for what felt like miles, marking trees, trying to keep track. But, just like before, after what should have been a long hike, we ended up back at the camp. Alex and Matt were already there, looking frustrated. "Same thing happened," Alex said, his face pale. "We went straight and we still came back." By then, it wasn't just strange. It was terrifying. Every trail led us back, no matter what we did. We tried to talk to the other campers, asking them if they knew what was going on. They didn't answer, just stared with blank expressions. One of them, a man with a long beard, finally spoke. "You can't leave," he said. We laughed nervously, but he didn't. Nobody leaves. I remember the chill that ran down my spine when he said that. Jenny tried to ask more, but the man just turned away, ignoring us like the rest. That night, everything felt wrong. The wind was too still, the forest too quiet. None of us could sleep. We kept hearing noises, strange rustling in the trees, footsteps just beyond the light of the campfire. Alex swore he saw someone standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. But when we shined the flashlight, no one was there. The next morning, we were desperate. We packed our stuff and decided to leave, no more hiking or trying to figure it out. We'd follow the road, even if it took all day. But after hours of walking, we ended up back at the camp again. I don't know how to explain the feeling. It was like we were trapped, like the whole forest was keeping us there. No matter what we did, we couldn't leave. The other campers were still watching, their faces expressionless, as if waiting for something. That's when everything started falling apart. We argued, blaming each other for what was happening. Matt and Alex wanted to split up again, but Jenny and I thought it was too dangerous. We didn't know what was going on, but splitting up didn't seem like the answer. We did it anyway. Alex and Matt went one way, and Jenny and I stayed at the camp. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. Really scared. We didn't hear from the guys for hours. When they didn't come back by nightfall, Jenny started to cry. We waited by the fire, staring into the darkness, but they never returned. The next morning, I woke up alone. Jenny was gone, and I had no idea where she went. The camp was eerily quiet. The other campers were gone too, no sign of them or their tents. I was the only one left. I tried to leave again, following the same path we'd walked before. But just like every time before, I ended up back at the campground, over and over. By then, I was losing it. I couldn't think straight. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, I stumbled back into the camp. The sun was setting, and the fire pit was still smoldering. I sat down, staring at the embers, wondering if I'd ever leave. Then I heard footsteps behind me. One of the campers, the bearded man from before, stood there. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You can leave," he said, his voice soft. "But you have to choose to stay first." I didn't understand what he meant. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just turned and walked away into the trees. I tried to follow him, but he disappeared into the shadows. I tried to leave again that night, but it was the same. Every path brought me back to the camp. It's been days, maybe weeks. I've lost track of time. I don't know if I'll ever leave. Maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe none of us were. I went hiking with my friend Marco last weekend. We both needed a break from the city, and there's this forest a couple hours out that's quiet. Not many people go there. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just us walking and talking, getting away from work and stress. But now, I can't stop thinking about what happened. I haven't slept right since we got back. Every time I close my eyes, I hear footsteps. The day started off normal. The forest was beautiful, with tall trees and the kind of fresh air you only get far from the city. At first it was perfect, calm, with nothing but the sound of leaves crunching under our boots and birds singing somewhere high above us. We joked around, talked about work and life, the usual stuff. We didn't have any set destination, just wandering, enjoying the quiet. But after a couple of hours, the silence felt different. The birds stopped singing and the wind died down. I noticed it first, but Marco didn't seem to care. He just shrugged and said it was probably nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. You know how sometimes the air just feels heavy, like something is wrong but you can't see it yet? That's when we saw the footprints. They were strange, barefoot but not quite human. The toes were long, too long, and they seemed to sink deeper into the dirt than they should have. At first, we laughed it off, saying it was probably some kid messing around, but we couldn't explain how the tracks suddenly disappeared. One moment, they were there, clear as day in the mud, and then gone. The trail just stopped like the person vanished into thin air. We joked about it, but I could tell Marco was a little uneasy too. We kept walking, but I couldn't shake the thought of those footprints. My eyes kept scanning the ground, looking for more, and sure enough, a few minutes later, they were back. This time, they were closer, like someone had been following us and got careless for a moment. Marco tried to make light of it, but his voice sounded off. "Maybe it's just an animal," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. The deeper we went, the more often we saw the tracks. Sometimes they were in front of us, sometimes behind, but they always seemed fresh, like whoever or whatever was making them wasn't far away. The worst part was when we realized they'd started circling us. No matter which way we turned, the prints would show up, making loops around where we had just been. That's when it hit us. Something was playing with us. Something that knew we were there and wanted us to know it was watching. We tried to act calm, to think logically. Maybe it was just some animal, we told ourselves. A weird one, but still nothing dangerous. But deep down, I knew better. The prints were too deliberate, too human, but not quite. As we kept walking, things got worse. The air felt colder, and the sky started to darken, even though it wasn't that late. It felt like time was moving faster, like the day was slipping away from us. Marco stopped suddenly, and when I looked at him, he had this look on his face, pale and terrified. He pointed at the ground ahead of us. There, not 20 feet away, was a fresh set of tracks. They led right towards us, but once again, they disappeared. Just gone. There was no place to hide. Nothing. Just trees. We should have turned back right then. I know that now. But instead, we just stood there, frozen. And then we heard it, the sound of branches snapping, like someone, or something, moving quickly through the trees. Too close, way too close. "We need to go," Marco whispered, and I didn't argue. We started walking faster, trying to keep calm, but every few minutes there'd be another snap, another rustle. It felt like whatever was making those noises was getting bolder. The footprints started appearing again, even closer than before. The strange thing was, they didn't always come from behind us. Sometimes they were ahead, like it was toying with us, getting us lost on purpose. My heart was racing, my thoughts a blur. We were far from the trailhead, and the trees all looked the same. I wasn't sure which direction was the right one anymore, and neither was Marco. Panic set in. We started running, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise anymore. All I could think about was getting out. I kept hearing the footsteps behind us, like they were matching our pace. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I expected to see something, someone, but there was never anyone there. Just those damn tracks, appearing and disappearing like they were mocking us. At some point, Marco tripped. He hit the ground hard, and when I stopped to help him up, we both saw it. The footprints were right next to us, like whoever it was had been standing there, watching, just waiting for us to fall. And then they stopped. The prints didn't lead away, they just ended. I grabbed Marco, pulling him to his feet, and we started running again, faster this time, not caring where we were going. I could hear him panting behind me, struggling to keep up, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Finally, we saw it. A clearing up ahead. A way out. Relief washed over me, and for a moment I thought we'd made it. But as we broke into the open space, I realized something was wrong. The ground was soft, freshly disturbed, and right there in front of us was the last set of tracks. They stopped at the edge of the clearing as if whoever, or whatever, had been following us was waiting there. I looked around, heart pounding, but the forest was empty. No movement, no sound, just us and the fading light. I felt Marco's hand on my shoulder, shaking, and we both stood there, staring at the empty space where the footprints ended. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the trees behind us. I don't know what happened next. I just know that we never went back to that forest, and I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps. The abandoned car, I always like driving alone. It clears my head, gives me space to think, and sometimes I just want to be away from everything. That day, I decided to take a drive through the forest, along a quiet road I found a few months ago. It's one of those back roads no one really uses unless they have to. The trees are thick, and sometimes they make it feel like the world is closing in around you. But I enjoyed it. Or at least, I used to. I was driving slowly, enjoying the silence when I saw it. An old sedan parked at a strange angle on the side of the road. The front doors, were wide open. That immediately felt off to me. I didn't see anyone nearby, and there was no other car around. No houses, no paths, just trees and that abandoned car. I slowed down. For a second, I thought about just driving past it, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up behind the car and got out. The air was cooler here, and the silence felt different, heavier. I walked toward the sedan. Inside, I saw things that made me more uneasy. There were personal belongings in the seats, purses, a phone, and a couple of backpacks. It looked like the people just left everything behind in a hurry. No sign of a struggle, but it didn't feel right. Maybe they went for a hike and got lost, I thought. I called out. No one answered. I thought about getting back in my car and leaving, but something pulled me in. I started walking into the woods, calling out again. Hello? Is anyone there? My voice felt small, swallowed by the trees. The more I walked, the darker it seemed to get. I checked the time. It was still afternoon, but in the forest, the light barely broke through the branches. After what felt like forever, I stopped. I hadn't heard anything. No birds, no rustling leaves, just nothing. That's when the fear hit me. I wasn't sure why I kept going, but something in me needed to know, needed to find out what happened. I kept walking deeper. I don't know how long I had been walking when I saw it, a campsite or what was left of one. There were torn bags, clothes thrown everywhere, and an abandoned tent. It looked like someone left in a hurry, or like they were forced out. My stomach dropped. Something definitely went wrong here. I felt the urge to turn back, but I couldn't. Not yet. The sun was starting to set. I had wandered way too far from the road. Panic set in as I tried to retrace my steps. I walked faster, feeling like the trees were closing in around me. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That's when I heard it. Voices. Faint, but definitely there. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. I turned in every direction trying to find where the voices were coming from, but there was no one. I picked up my pace, my breathing getting quicker with each step. The whispering followed me, growing louder, but I couldn't see anyone. I stumbled, catching myself on a tree, and that's when I saw it. A piece of clothing, stuck in the bushes. It was covered in blood. My blood ran cold. Whatever happened here wasn't an accident, and I wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was still out here, and I was being watched. I didn't want to stay another second. I turned and ran, branches cutting at my arms and face. The sun had nearly disappeared, and everything was turning dark. My mind was racing. and I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd just seen. The bloody clothes, the abandoned car, those whispers. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the road again. I was out of breath, my chest tight from running. I ran toward my car, relief washing over me. But as I got closer, I froze. The abandoned car, the doors were closed. I was sure they were open when I left. Someone had been here while I was in the woods. I didn't want to think about it. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking as I sped away, not caring about the road anymore. I just needed to leave. As I drove, my mind raced. What happened to the people in that car? What forced them to leave everything behind? The bloody clothes, the abandoned campsite, it all painted a terrifying picture. I don't know who or what did this, but I was so close to it. Too close. The entire way home, I couldn't stop checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone behind me. But there was nothing, just the dark road and the headlights ahead. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home. I didn't just stumble upon an abandoned car, I stumbled into something far worse. And what scares me the most? The thought that whoever or whatever was out there, I was next. We were camping for a few days near this old, forgotten cave. It wasn't part of the plan, but when we saw the dark entrance, it felt like something we couldn't ignore. There were 4 of us, me, Sam, Peter, and Lisa. We were bored, and the cave looked like an adventure. Sam joked that it would make a cool story later, and Peter, always the curious one, agreed. Lisa hesitated for a moment, but we all convinced her. It was just a cave. We thought we'd explore for a bit, maybe take some pictures, and come back to the camp. The air changed the moment we stepped inside. It felt colder, even though it was a warm day outside. I noticed it right away, but didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound like I was scared. We all had our flashlights, shining them on the rough stone walls. At first, it was kind of fun. The silent campground. I didn't think much when I first arrived. The campground was quiet, a little too quiet, but that's what I came for. I wanted to get away, to clear my head. My life had been a mess lately, and this place was supposed to be peaceful. But the moment I stepped out of my car, something didn't feel right. You know that feeling when something is just off, but you can't put your finger on it? That's what hit me. There were tents still set up. A few campfires were burned out but still warm, smoke faintly rising. There were empty chairs around the fire pits, coolers left open, some with food inside. I looked around, confused. Where were the people? It looked like they had been here recently, maybe even earlier today. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe they went on a hike or to swim in the lake. I tried to enjoy the silence, but it wasn't the kind of silence I wanted. It was thick, heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. After setting up my own tent, I walked around the campsite. I wasn't snooping, just curious. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows over the ground, making everything feel darker than it should have. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. A camping chair knocked over near one of the tents. I frowned, looking closer. The ground was disturbed, like there had been a struggle. Clothes were scattered outside the tent, shoes left in a pile like someone took them off in a hurry. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel the panic creeping in. But I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind knocked the chair over. Maybe the campers were messy. I needed to calm down. Then I found a torn piece of fabric hanging from a tree branch near the edge of the woods. It was small, like from a shirt or a jacket. At that point, I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Something bad happened here. I should have left right then, but I didn't. Instead, I kept walking. The farther I went, the worse it got. Another tent was ripped open, its zipper torn apart like someone, or something, forced its way inside. Inside, sleeping bags were tossed around, backpacks emptied, food scattered. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. What could have happened here? Who or what did this? That's when I saw it. A phone, smashed and half buried in the dirt. There was a dark stain next to it. Blood. My chest tightened and my legs felt weak. This was wrong. I needed to leave, but I didn't move. I stood there, frozen, listening. And then I heard it. A twig snapped in the trees behind me. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the tree line. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. My breathing was loud in the stillness. I felt like I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I forced myself to walk back to my tent. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I leave? Should I wait? What if the campers came back? Maybe I was overreacting. But the blood, the torn tents, it all made my gut twist with fear. I didn't want to be the paranoid guy. But something terrible had happened here. Just as I reached my tent, I found something on the ground near the fire pit. It was a notebook, dirty and half covered in ash. I picked it up, hands shaking as I opened it. The writing inside was messy, frantic, like someone had scribbled it in a rush. They're watching us. We don't know who they are, but they're out there. Every night we hear them, getting closer. We're not safe. My blood ran cold as I read those words. They felt real, desperate. I flipped through the pages, seeing more of the same: panic, fear. Whoever wrote this was terrified, and now they were gone. I dropped the notebook and started packing my things. I needed to leave right now, but as I grabbed my bag, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, not distant this time, close, too close. I froze, listening. My heart was pounding in my ears. The footsteps were getting closer, slow and deliberate. I turned my head slowly toward the sound, but I couldn't see anything. Whoever, or whatever it was, they were staying just out of sight. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I grabbed my bag and ran. My feet pounded the ground as I sprinted toward my car, not daring to look back. I could hear the footsteps behind me, faster now, chasing me. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I kept running. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before I managed to unlock the door. I threw my bag inside and jumped in, slamming the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I hit the gas, speeding out of the campground. I didn't look back, but I swear I could still hear the footsteps right behind me, following me down the road. I don't know what happened to the people at that campground, and I don't want to know. I've tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and I'll never go camping again. I know it sounds strange, but I swear this happened. I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks or something worse, but I'll let you decide. I had been hiking all day, alone in the woods, trying to clear my head. I needed it, the fresh air, the silence. Things had been stressful lately. I wasn't in a good place mentally, and maybe that made things worse. I drove out to a campsite far from the city. No people, no distractions, just me and nature. By the time I got back to the campsite, the sun was going down. The light was fading fast, the shadows growing longer, and the temperature dropped. I was tired, hungry, just wanting to get home. My car was parked where I left it, but something was off immediately. The doors were locked. At first, I thought maybe I had accidentally hit the lock button before I left. But no, I clearly remembered leaving the doors unlocked. I always do when I go hiking. Less chance of losing my keys or fumbling for them later. I looked through the window, and there they were, sitting on the driver's seat. My keys. I froze for a second. How could the car be locked if the keys were inside? That's when I felt a chill creep up my spine, and it wasn't from the cold air. It didn't make sense, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired, not thinking straight. I checked all the doors, hoping one might be unlocked by mistake, but they were all locked, tight. There I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no keys and no way to get into my car. I started feeling uneasy, but I told myself to calm down. I could figure this out. Maybe I could find something to break the window with, or walk back to the main road to get help. But then, I heard it. A soft crunch, like someone stepping on dried leaves. My heart stopped. I turned around quickly, scanning the trees, but I didn't see anyone. The sun was almost gone now, and the woods looked dark and endless. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or something. But then I heard it again, closer this time. Footsteps, definitely human. I looked around, hoping to see someone, but there was nothing. It was too quiet, and that's when I realized how alone I really was. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, but of course, it was dead. I cursed under my breath. Panic started to set in. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I was being watched, like someone was out there in the woods staring at me. The air felt heavier, like something was pressing down on me. I tried to stay calm, looking for something, anything that could help me. I thought about breaking the car window. I could get a rock, break the glass, and get the keys. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt wrong, like I was being stupid for even thinking about it. And the feeling that I was being watched, it was growing stronger. I circled the car, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, fresh ones, too big to be mine, leading right up to my car and then back into the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone approach the car earlier. How long had they been there? I looked around, heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't see anyone. The woods were dark now, completely black, except for the faint light from the sky. Suddenly, the car lights flashed on, blinding me for a second. I jumped back, heart racing. I hadn't touched anything. My keys were still inside. How did the lights come on by themselves? And then I saw movement inside the car. Something or someone was in the back seat. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I thought I had been alone. I tried to make sense of it, but nothing added up. I could feel my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, shout for help, but my throat felt tight, like fear had gripped it shut. The car horn suddenly blared, loud and sharp, cutting through the silence of the night. I froze. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. The car lights were still on, and I could see a shadow inside, shifting slowly. It felt like time had stopped. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of the car door unlocking. I turned, ready to bolt into the woods, not caring where I ended up, but I hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping it was all in my head. Maybe I was still trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But then I heard the door creak open behind me. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I took a step forward, then another. My legs felt like they were moving through mud, slow and heavy. I don't remember how long I stood there, but when I finally looked back, the driver's door was wide open. The back seat was empty. No one was there. My keys were still on the driver's seat, untouched. I don't know how I made it out of there, but I ran. I ran through the trees, not stopping until I reached the main road. I flagged down the first car I saw, breathless, shaking. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any answers. I've thought about going back, trying to figure out what happened, but I can't. The more I think about it, the less it makes sense. But one thing I know for sure, I was not alone that night. I still have nightmares about that open door. I'm not sure if I can fully explain what happened, but here it goes. Last weekend, I decided to take a solo camping trip. I needed a break from everything: work, city noise, people. I thought a few days alone in the mountains would clear my head. It was supposed to be peaceful. I found a nice spot deep in the forest. No one around, no signs of other campers. Exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent, made a small fire, and just sat there listening to the quiet. I hadn't felt that calm in months. The air was fresh, and the only sounds were the trees moving with the wind. Everything was perfect. Then, out of nowhere, this guy appeared. I didn't hear him coming, which was weird because I thought I would have heard footsteps. He looked tired, dirty, like he had been hiking for days. His clothes were torn, and his backpack seemed way too heavy. He didn't say much, just asked if I had seen anyone else around. I told him no, that I hadn't seen anyone since I arrived. He nodded, looked around, and mumbled something about being lost. I offered him water, but he just shook his head and walked off into the woods. I watched him disappear into the trees, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that he shouldn't have been out there alone, not in the condition he was in. But I figured he knew what he was doing. Hikers get lost sometimes, right? That night, I couldn't sleep. At first, it was the usual sounds you hear in the woods: branches breaking, small animals moving through the leaves. But after a while, the noises got closer, louder. I lay there, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or maybe a deer passing by. But then I heard it. Footsteps, heavy and slow, like someone was walking right outside my tent. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to go away. It didn't. The footsteps circled my tent, stopping every few minutes as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was watching me, waiting for something. I wanted to unzip the tent, to look out and see who it was, but I couldn't. Fear had me frozen. I just lay there, listening, every muscle in my body tense. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour, but eventually, the footsteps faded, and the forest went silent again. I barely slept. The next morning, I decided to pack up and leave early. But first, I wanted to check on that hiker. Something didn't sit right with me about the whole situation. I walked around the area where I last saw him, calling out his name, even though I didn't know it. There was no sign of him, not even a footprint. I headed to the ranger station on my way out, just to report that I had seen him. Maybe he was lost and needed help. When I told the ranger about him, she looked at me like I was crazy. She asked me to describe him, so I did. Tall, dark hair, torn clothes, big backpack. Her face went pale. "That hiker has been missing for over 3 weeks," she said, her voice low, like she didn't even believe what she was saying. "We've had search teams out, but no one's found him. You need to leave the area, now." I didn't argue. Something in the way she said it made me feel like I wasn't safe there. I rushed back to my campsite, packed up as quickly as I could, but the whole time, I felt like someone was watching me. Every time I looked up, I saw movement in the trees, just out of the corner of my eye. But whenever I turned to look, nothing was there. My heart was racing. I just wanted to get out of the forest, back to my car, back to somewhere with people. The path out seemed longer than I remembered. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that there was nothing out there, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched was too strong. Finally, after what felt like hours, I reached the parking lot. My car was the only one there, which wasn't surprising given how remote the spot was. I thought I was safe, but as I opened the door, I saw him, standing at the edge of the lot, just staring at me. It was the hiker, the same guy I saw the day before. But something was wrong. He looked exactly the same as when I first saw him. Same clothes, same torn backpack, same tired eyes. It was like he hadn't moved or changed at all since yesterday. My heart started pounding. I wanted to call out to him, ask if he needed help, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I glanced over at another camper who had just arrived, trying to get their attention. But when I looked back, the hiker was gone. Vanished into thin air, just like that. I didn't stick around to find out what happened. I got into my car and drove away as fast as I could. I haven't been able to stop thinking about him since. Who was he? How could someone just disappear like that? And if he's been missing for weeks, then who did I see? I don't have answers, but one thing is for sure. I'm never going camping alone again. I remember thinking it was a great idea at the time. My friend Luke and I had been talking about getting away from the city for weeks. No crowds, no noise, just the two of us, some fresh air, and the open forest. We found this remote camping spot online, one that didn't show up on any official maps. Perfect, right? It was supposed to be peaceful, away from all the busy campsites. Just nature. The drive there took hours, deeper and deeper into the woods. We reached a clearing just before sunset, a flat area surrounded by tall trees. It seemed like no one had been here in a long time. The air felt still, too still, almost like the forest was holding its breath. But I didn't think too much of it. It was probably just my nerves after all that driving. We set up the tent quickly, excited to start our little adventure. The sun was setting and the sky turned a deep orange. Luke joked about how we finally escaped the chaos of the city. We laughed, feeling good about the decision. I noticed some old junk scattered around, rusty cans and bits of cloth near the edge of the trees, but I shrugged it off. Campers leave stuff behind all the time. Luke seemed uneasy, though. He didn't say much about it, just stared at the mess like something about it bothered him. The first couple of hours were fine. We cooked some food over the fire and talked, but as the night got darker, I felt a weird kind of tension. There were no sounds, no animals, not even wind rustling the leaves. It was so quiet, it almost hurt my ears. Luke pointed out how strange it was, but I brushed him off, saying, "It's nice, right? Finally, some peace." Later that night, I woke up. Something was off. The fire was still burning a little, but the air felt colder, sharper. I listened, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, careful steps, moving just outside the tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or something, but the steps were too deliberate, too heavy. Luke was still asleep, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, but then I heard something drag on the ground, like metal scraping over dirt. I peeked out through the small opening in the tent and saw something that made my stomach twist. Those old items we had ignored earlier, they weren't scattered anymore. They were arranged like someone had been moving them while we slept. A rope lay coiled neatly by the tree, and there was a tarp, folded in a way that wasn't random. My mind raced. Had someone been here before us, or were they here now, watching us? I nudged Luke awake, whispering that something was wrong, but he didn't take me seriously at first. He thought I was just being paranoid until he heard it too, the sound of someone or something moving around outside again. We stayed still, listening, too scared to even breathe loudly. That's when we saw the light, a small beam cutting through the darkness, coming from the edge of the woods. It wasn't far, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. Luke grabbed my arm and whispered, We need to get out of here. Now. But how? If we left the tent, whoever was out there would see us. Running wasn't an option. The light kept moving, swinging slowly back and forth like it was searching for something or someone. We waited, our bodies tense, hoping the light would pass. But then, suddenly, the light stopped. It pointed directly at our tent. I couldn't see the person holding it, but I could feel them watching us. My skin crawled. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I couldn't make my legs move. Then we heard him. A low voice, cold and flat. "You're in the wrong place." Luke and I looked at each other, our fear now absolute. There was no doubt anymore. We had camped at someone's hideout, and he didn't want us there. I wanted to say something, to explain it was a mistake, that we'd leave and never come back, but my mouth was dry, and no words came out. We sat there in silence, waiting for him to do something, but he didn't. He just stood there, the light on us, making sure we knew we were not alone. Eventually, the light disappeared. We waited for what felt like hours before finally working up the courage to move. As the first light of dawn touched the trees, we grabbed our stuff and bolted, leaving behind whatever we couldn't carry. I don't even remember running back to the car, only that every second felt like someone was right behind us. We didn't speak until we were on the road, driving as fast as we could away from that place. Once we got back to the city, we reported the incident to the local authorities, but when they went to check the site, they found nothing. No tarp, no rope, no man. Nothing but an empty clearing. I still think about it sometimes, wondering what would have happened if we hadn't woken up. Who was that man? What did he want? I'm not sure if Luke and I imagined some of it, fear playing tricks on us, but I know one thing for sure, we weren't supposed to be there. And someone made sure we'd never forget it. I'm not the type to scare easily. I've been hiking for years, going on trails most people avoid. There's something peaceful about being alone in the woods, just you and nature. So when I found this trail, one that wasn't on the map, I thought, why not? It wasn't overgrown like you'd expect from an unmarked path. It looked like someone had walked it recently. The footprints were faint, but they were there. It was weird. The trees around it felt denser. I've never camped alone before, but I thought it would help clear my mind. Work had been tough, and I needed a break. Just me, the trees, and the quiet of the forest. No phone, no distractions, no people. That's what I wanted, a break from people. But now, I wish I hadn't gone. The first day was peaceful enough. I hiked for hours, deeper into the woods than I probably should have gone. Found a spot near a small stream, pitched my tent, and settled in for the night. It was perfect. Well, almost. There was this feeling like I wasn't really alone. At first, I thought it was just because I wasn't used to being out here by myself. Every little noise made me jump, but I convinced myself it was nothing. It's nature, after all. There's bound to be some strange sounds, right? By the time night fell, I was too tired to care. I crawled into my tent and fell asleep almost immediately. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something was wrong. I couldn't figure out what it was at first. I was groggy, still half asleep. That's when I noticed him. There was a man sitting inside my tent. I swear he wasn't there when I went to bed. He was just sitting there, cross-legged, staring at me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I thought maybe if I stayed still, he wouldn't do anything. Maybe he didn't notice I was awake. I kept my eyes barely open, just enough to see him. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just stared. I have no idea how long he stayed like that. It felt like forever, but eventually he got up and left. He didn't make a sound. He just stood up, unzipped the tent, and walked out. I lay there, frozen, until the sun came up. When morning came, I tried to convince myself it was a dream. I must have imagined it. I was probably just stressed from work and my brain made up something to freak me out. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. I checked outside the tent. There were footprints. They led away from the tent, disappearing into the woods. But there was no one around, no sign of him. I should have left right then, packed up and gone home. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was embarrassed, like leaving would be admitting I was scared. So I stayed. The whole day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every crack of a branch or rustle in the leaves made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him again, but there was no one. I tried to distract myself, but it was no use. The unease never went away. That night, I was scared to fall asleep. I thought about leaving, but it was too late. The sun had already gone down and I didn't want to hike out of the woods in the dark. So I crawled into my tent and zipped it up tight, like that would somehow protect me. I lay there, wide awake, listening to every little sound outside. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up again in the middle of the night. My heart sank. I didn't want to open my eyes. I was too scared of what I might see, but I couldn't help it. Slowly, I opened them. He was back. This time, he wasn't alone. There was another person standing just outside the tent. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could make out their shape. They were standing completely still, just like the man inside my tent. Watching. Waiting. My mind raced. Why were they here? What did they want? I wanted to scream, but I was too afraid. What if they had weapons? What if there were more of them? The man inside the tent hadn't moved. He was sitting in the same spot as before, staring at me. The figure outside didn't move either. They were both just waiting. For what? I don't know. Every second felt like an eternity. I needed to do something. But what? Run? Fight? Stay still? I couldn't think straight. My hands shook as I reached for the zipper of the tent. Slowly, quietly. I had to get out. I had to escape, but just as I started to pull the zipper down, I froze. The person outside shifted like they knew I was about to make a move. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. The man inside the tent stood up. Slowly, he reached for the zipper on his side of the tent. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. This was it. I had to make a choice, run or stay and hope for the best. But it was too late. The tent unzipped. I lunged for the opening on my side, tearing at the zipper with trembling hands. My mind was in a frenzy, every instinct telling me to run, run, run. But as I stepped out into the cold night, I realized something. They were waiting for me. I stopped, frozen in place, as more figures emerged from the trees, silent, still, watching. There was nowhere to run. I was surrounded. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my legs weaken. I wanted to scream, to do anything, but the fear held me in place. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were coming closer, and that's when I knew. I wasn't going to make it out of here. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they were, but I can still see their faces in my mind, blank, emotionless, like they were playing a game I didn't understand. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see them, waiting, watching. I haven't been camping since, and I don't think I ever will again.